field. It's a totally normal spring afternoon during his sophomore year of high school.
Right, just a completely average day.
Yeah, exactly. He's just standing there in the on-deck circle, waiting for his turn at the plate. And right behind him, a teammate is warming up, taking these really wide, just careless practice swings.
Oh, no.
And then the bat slips out of the teammate's hands. It flies backward through the air, and it hits the boy squarely in the face.
God, it's just a brutally visceral moment. The sheer physical force of that kind of impact it's catastrophic.
He collapses instantly. His skull is fractured in multiple places. His eye socket is completely shattered. There's even this terrifying moment on the field where he actually stops breathing.
Wow.
Yeah, he ends up being airlifted to a hospital. They place him in a medically induced coma. And for days, nobody even knows if he's going to survive, let alone, fully recover.
Which is terrifying.
It is. But today's deep dive is really about what happens next. Because that boy was James Clear. And his agonizing, totally invisible recovery basically became the blueprint for fundamentally rewriting human behavior.
Which perfectly sets up our mission for you, the listener, today. We are pulling all our insights from a detailed video breakdown of Clear's work on atomic habits. We're going to explore how you can make these monumental life changes without the crushing burnout of a massive life overhaul.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you were expecting, like, a cinematic movie montage of his recovery, complete with a dramatic rock anthem and an overnight epiphany, you'd be sorely disappointed.
Oh, absolutely.
The reality of his situation actually birthed what we're calling the compound interest of self-improvement.
The contrast between that Hollywood narrative of change and the biological reality is just stark. When Clear woke up, there was no triumphant bounce back.
Right.
He had to relearn the most agonizingly basic human functions. We are talking about retraining his brain just to see clearly again.
Just to see. That's wild.
Yeah, he had to relearn how to smell. Getting through a normal Tuesday was a monumental task for him.
So he couldn't rely on grand, sweeping gestures. If he tried to run a mile or read a whole book, his body would have just shut down.
Exactly.
He was forced by his circumstances to rely entirely on thousands of unglamorous, unfilmed, microscopic repetitions. Just one more painful physical therapy session, one more tiny, almost invisible win.
And that transition from his very personal micro-level physical recovery to a macro-level psychological principle is where the underlying math becomes undeniably powerful.
The math is crazy.
It is.
Yeah.
Because when we hear the phrase, get 1% better, it registers in our brains as basically negligible. Improving by 1% on a random morning doesn't show up in the mirror.
Right.
It doesn't move the needle in your bank account at all.
But the source material lays out this mathematical foundation that completely flips that perception on its head. It's called the 37x rule. And it essentially proves that we are historically terrible at understanding compounding math.
Oh, it's a massive cognitive blind spot for humans, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you improve by just 1% every single day for an entire year, the math doesn't mean you end up like 365% better.
Which is what you'd intuitively think.
Exactly, but because that tiny advantage compounds on top of the previous day's advantage every single day, you actually end up roughly 37 times better than where you started.
37 times. Think about that in the context of learning a new language or starting a fitness routine. But the flip side is what's really sobering.
Yeah, the math works in reverse with the exact same ruthlessness.
Right.
If you decline by just 1% a day, like if you skip the workout, eat the junk food, blow off the reading, you don't just stay stagnant or fall a tiny bit behind.
You tank.
You do. That negative compounding leads to an almost complete, total erosion of your baseline skills or your health. We tend to judge a habit by whether it produced a result this week.
Totally.
But habits are a daily vote. Miss once, and nothing happens. Miss twice, and you've inadvertently started a brand new pattern of erosion.
To really visualize what this erosion looks like on a grand scale, the source dives into the story of British cycling.
Oh, this is a great example.
It's so good. For most of the 20th century, British cyclists were, to put it mildly, an international joke. They were the poster children for negative compounding.
They really were. They had gone nearly 100 years without a single Tour de France win.
100 years.
Yeah, it was one of the worst prolonged records in the history of professional sports.
Bike manufacturers actually didn't want to sell equipment to them because they were afraid it would hurt their brand just by association.
That is just brutal. But then, in 2003, they bring in this new performance director named Dave Brailsford.
Right.
And his mandate completely bucked the traditional sports management trend. He didn't come in and demand million-dollar budget increases or, try to recruit entirely new athletes with freak genetics.
No, he did something completely different.
Instead, he implemented a strategy of looking for a 1% margin of improvement in absolutely everything they did. The details of his approach sound almost absurd when you first hear them because they are so embarrassingly small.
I mean, they redesigned the bike seats just to make them a fraction more comfortable over long distances.
Which seems so minor.
Right. And they started rubbing surgical alcohol on the tires to get maybe a millimeter more grip on the pavement.
Wow.
They even brought in doctors to teach the riders the optimal way to wash their hands, just so they wouldn't catch a cold and miss a single day of training.
They actually had the riders test different pillows and mattresses, too.
No way.
Yeah, and then they brought those exact mattresses with them to hotels on the road, so their sleep was optimized by a fraction of a percent. And they repainted the entire inside of the team's transport truck stark white.
Just to spot a few specks of dust.
Exactly.
Because a tiny amount of dust could degrade the performance of those finely tuned bike mechanics. Now, individually, if you're a rival team looking at Brailsford repainting a truck or testing massage gels, you'd think he was completely wasting his time.
Oh, you'd laugh at him.
But what was the result? Within 5 years, this historically pathetic team absolutely dominated the 2008 Beijing Olympics, winning roughly 60% of the gold medals available.
Which is just staggering.
And within 8 years, a British rider won the Tour de France for the first time in 110 years.
What's fascinating here is that you cannot point to a single dramatic change they made that caused that victory.
Right.
There was no secret aerodynamic weapon or revolutionary training regimen. The magic was entirely in the compounding of hundreds of microscopic 1% advantages.
So what does this all mean? I mean, if the math is really this simple and the compounding effect has been proven on the absolute highest stage by Olympic athletes, why do your everyday habits still fail so often?
That is the million-dollar question.
Like, are we all just inherently lazy? Because for my whole life, I've been told that if I fail at a diet or a workout plan, I just didn't have enough willpower.
And that is the great cultural myth we need to dismantle right now. The whole concept of willpower as a primary tool for change is a massive psychological trap.
It really is.
We treat motivation like it's this infinite resource that we can just summon on command if we just, quote-unquote, want it badly enough.
To me, trying to use willpower to build a daily habit is like trying to hold a giant beach ball underwater.
Oh, I like that.
You can muscle it down for a little while, maybe a few days or a week, but the second your arms get tired or you get distracted, that ball's going to launch right back up and hit you in the face. You have to eventually drain the pool.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it because biologically your brain is doing exactly that. It's called decision fatigue.
Right.
Every time you have to actively choose to resist a temptation or force yourself to do a hard task, you are burning glucose in your prefrontal cortex.
You're literally burning fuel.
Exactly.
Huh.
By the end of the day, that battery is completely depleted. That's why you aren't eating the entire sleeve of cookies at 9 a.m.
Oh, totally.
You're eating it at 9:00 p.m. when your prefrontal cortex is exhausted. The goal of this entire framework isn't to force yourself to be more disciplined. The goal is to build an environment where the right behavior becomes the default, effortless behavior.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of doing that. The source material outlines that every single habit begins with the cue.
A trigger.
Yeah, a trigger that kicks off the behavior before you even consciously realize you're doing it. And the fundamental problem we face is that our good habits are usually invisible, hidden away in a cupboard or a schedule.
Right out of sight.
While our bad habits are brightly colored and literally screaming for our attention on our screens or our countertops.
If the cue isn't obvious, the behavior simply will not happen.
Yeah.
Our brains are processing millions of bits of sensory information every second. If you don't make the cue for your desired habit aggressively visible, your brain will just filter it out.
The source illustrates this with a really telling story about a hospital in Indiana. For years, they had been struggling with this massive compliance issue.
Hand washing.
Yeah, getting their doctors to wash their hands consistently between seeing patients.
Which is deeply ironic when you pause to consider the context.
Right.
These are highly educated medical professionals. They understand the pathology of bacteria. They know the literal life or death stakes of hospital-acquired infections better than anyone else on the planet.
That's what's so wild about this. It perfectly proves that knowledge does not equal action. You can have all the education in the world, you can know exactly what the dire consequences are, and still not execute the habit.
Exactly.
The hospital tried everything. They sent angry memos. They put up warning posters in the bathrooms. Nothing worked.
Because a poster is just background noise to an overworked doctor.
Yeah, you just tune it out.
The successful intervention required a complete environmental redesign. They eventually installed a digital screen right at eye level directly in the doctor's path.
This part is so clever.
It is. Whenever a doctor walked away from a patient's room, this screen would display a real-time visual counter of the germs currently accumulating on their hands based on sensors.
It went from an abstract concept, like I should probably wash my hands, to a flashing, impossible-to-ignore reality, literally staring them in the face.
And compliance jumped almost immediately.
The actionable takeaway for you listening is that you have to design your physical space so that the habit you want is practically tripping you up. Put the book on your pillow, put the guitar on the couch.
And conversely, you have to make the cues for your bad habits invisible.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right. If you want to stop eating junk food, it cannot be sitting on your kitchen counter. You have to make yourself work to find it.
Okay, so putting a screen in front of a doctor solves the problem of forgetting. Or putting my running shoes by the front door solves the problem of visibility.
Yes.
But what about when I see the shoes, I know I should run, and I actively, consciously choose to sit on the couch and watch Netflix anyway?
The act of rebellion.
Yeah. How do we override that act of resistance when we just don't want to do the work?
That moves us from the visual cue into the neurological craving.
Yeah.
To override that resistance, you have to employ a strategy the source calls temptation bundling.
Temptation bundling.
It's a very pragmatic psychological hack where you pair an action that you need to do with an action that you inherently want to do.
Like saying, I am only allowed to watch my favorite trashy reality TV show if I am physically walking on the treadmill.
Exactly.
Or I can only listen to my favorite true crime podcast while I'm doing the sink full of dirty dishes.
Precisely. And the reason this works is deeply rooted in our evolutionary biology, specifically how our dopamine system operates.
Dopamine is huge here.
It is. We tend to think of dopamine as the chemical of pleasure, something released when we get a reward, like taking a bite of cake. But neuroscientists have found that dopamine actually spikes highest in anticipation of a reward.
So just thinking about the cake makes your brain light up before you even taste it.
Yes. From an evolutionary standpoint, our ancestors evolved as hunter-gatherers. Our brains needed a chemical mechanism to motivate us to endure the grueling pursuit of hunting for food, not just the consummation of eating it.
Right, otherwise we'd never get off the couch to go hunt.
Exactly. Dopamine rewards the pursuit. So by bundling a temptation, you are intentionally hijacking that ancient anticipation mechanism.
Wow.
You take the exact same neurological loop that makes endlessly scrolling social media so sticky, and you point it at your treadmill. The treadmill suddenly becomes attractive because your brain is anticipating the TV show.
Okay, that is a brilliant hack. But let's say I've made the cue obvious and I've bundled it so it's attractive. I still actually have to expend the energy to do the task.
The actual friction.
Yeah, and the source argues that human beings are fundamentally wired to conserve energy. Friction matters way more than motivation.
Friction is the ultimate enemy of action. The higher the friction, the less likely the behavior.
The source breaks down this fascinating experiment conducted in a university photography class to prove this exact point. On the first day, the professor divided the room down the middle.
Okay.
One half of the class was told that their entire grade for the semester rested on submitting one single, absolute perfect photograph.
So they were graded entirely on theoretical quality.
Right. But the other half of the room was told they would be graded purely on quantity.
Interesting.
If they submitted 100 photos, they got an A. It didn't matter if the lighting was terrible or the lens was out of focus. Their only job was to shoot as much volume as humanly possible.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the results of this experiment are incredibly revealing about how human neurology actually learns and masters a skill.
Yeah, the results are wild.
By the end of the semester, the professor evaluated all the work. The group that produced the absolute best, most stunning, technically proficient photos wasn't the perfect group.
Right.
It was the quantity group.
The ones taking all the terrible photos ended up being the best photographers. I think we can distill that down to a pretty memorable maxim. Action breeds clarity, but perfection breeds paralysis.
That is a perfect way to summarize it.
Thanks.
The perfect group spent the entire semester paralyzed by the friction of trying to be flawless. They sat around theorizing about lighting and composition, terrified to make a mistake.
While the other guys just went to work.
Exactly. The quantity group just kept shooting. They made 100 mistakes, but with every click of the shutter, they subconsciously adjusted the lighting, they tweaked the composition, they built the neuromuscular pathways of the skill. Quality naturally emerged from volume.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the practical application of removing that friction is what the source calls the 2-minute rule.
This is such a great tool.
It really is. The idea is you take any massive new habit you want to build and you aggressively shrink it down until it takes less than 2 minutes to execute.
Just 2 minutes.
Yeah, so read an hour a day becomes read 1 single page. Run 3 miles becomes put on my running shoes and tie the laces.
You strip away every conceivable layer of friction until the barrier to entry is virtually zero.
Okay, wait, I'm going to push back here because I'm genuinely confused.
Go for it.
If my goal is to lose 50 pounds or train for a marathon, how does just tying my running shoes and stopping after 2 minutes actually help me? I'm not burning any calories. I'm not building any muscle. Isn't this just a psychological trick we're playing on ourselves?
It sounds like a trick, but if we connect this to the bigger picture of behavioral psychology, it is deeply profound.
Okay.
You are entirely correct that tying your shoes does not burn calories, but you cannot optimize a habit that does not exist.
Well, that's a good point.
You have to standardize before you can optimize. By executing a 2-minute action, you are mastering the art of showing up. You are physically building the neural pathway of the initiation ritual.
The ritual itself.
Exactly. The hardest part of a 3-mile run isn't the 3rd mile. It's the sequence of getting off the couch, putting on the gear, and walking out the front door.
That is so true.
If you make that initiation sequence so ridiculously low friction that skipping it feels stranger than just doing it, the 3-mile run will eventually follow naturally.
All right, I see the logic. You're cementing the on-ramp before you worry about the highway.
Exactly.
But that brings up the final hurdle. Let's say I've shown up, I put on the shoes, I went for the run. The problem is the actual payoff for that run, losing the weight, lowering my blood pressure, is still 6 months away.
The delayed return.
Yeah. How do we keep going week after week when the results are invisible?
This is the exact valley where most habits die. Human wiring, shaped by millions of years of evolution, demands instant gratification.
Right, we want it now.
Our ancestors didn't plan for a retirement fund 30 years out. They needed calories right now to survive the night. We are biologically rigged to repeat behaviors that feel rewarding immediately.
Which perfectly explains why eating a sleeve of cookies will always instinctively feel better than eating a kale salad.
Yes.
The reward of the sugar rush from the cookie hits your bloodstream right now. The reward of the salad is a slightly better cholesterol reading at a doctor's appointment next year.
Exactly. It's an evolutionary mismatch. So, to make a long-term delayed return habit stick in the modern world, you have to artificially manufacture a small, immediate signal of progress to attach to it.
The source material gives this incredibly visual example to solve this. The paperclip jar.
I love this story.
Me too. There was a man who worked in outbound sales, which involves making cold calls, one of the most tedious, rejection-having habits you could try to maintain.
It's grueling.
He set up 2 large glass jars on his desk. One was filled with 120 paper clips, and the other was completely empty.
Okay.
Every single time he dialed the phone and made a sales call, he would physically pick up 1 paperclip and drop it into the empty jar.
He created a purely visual, tactile signal of forward momentum.
But again, I have to ask, why on earth would a grown adult professional care about moving a tiny piece of bent wire from one glass jar to another? It sounds almost infantile.
It sounds simple, but it works flawlessly because it speaks the language of our neurology. The human brain actually doesn't care about the size of the reward nearly as much as we assume it does.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What it cares obsessively about is the immediacy of the reward. Hearing the clink of that paperclip dropping into the glass provides an instant, satisfying dopamine hit of completion.
I see.
It acts as a neurological bridge, connecting the frustrating action of today with the distant payoff of commissions months from now.
It's essentially manufacturing instant gratification for something healthy. But beneath all 4 of these mechanical laws we've discussed, making the cues obvious, bundling the cravings, removing the friction, and dropping the paper clips, the source outlines a foundational engine that makes this entire system run.
The core of it all.
Yeah, and this might be the most profound philosophical shift in the whole deep dive. Most of us go about setting habits completely backward. We focus entirely on the outcome. We say, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to write a novel.
We anchor our entire motivation to a distant, arbitrary finish line.
Right. But Clear argues that lasting, permanent change has to start by working backward from who you want to become. It's not about the outcome. It's entirely about your identity.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider right now about how you currently view yourself. Because under this framework, every habit you perform is not just a chore, it is simply a small piece of evidence, a microscopic vote for your personal identity.
Every time you sit down and write that single paragraph using the 2-minute rule, you're not just producing words on a page, you are casting a physical vote that tells your brain, I am a writer.
Every time you choose to go for a 10-minute walk instead of sitting down with a cigarette, you aren't just avoiding nicotine in that isolated moment. You are casting a powerful vote for the identity of, I am not a smoker.
For the listener out there right now who frequently thinks to themselves, I'm just naturally unorganized or I'm just not a morning person, this framework proves that your personality isn't fixed in stone.
Not at all.
It's just a set of habits you haven't broken yet. It's a total paradigm shift.
It truly is. No single vote transforms you overnight. But if you cast enough of those 1% votes day after day, the balance of evidence eventually shifts.
The scales tip.
Yes, you reach a point where you aren't forcing yourself to work toward a goal anymore using willpower. The identity just becomes who you are. The healthy habits become your default behavior simply because they align with your new self-concept.
And that brings us full circle, right back to that quiet hospital room we talked about at the very beginning.
Yeah.
If you had walked into that room and looked at that 15-year-old boy struggling for hours just to relearn how to track a finger with his eyes, you never would have guessed that his agonizingly slow, completely unglamorous recovery would eventually become the blueprint that millions of people use to rebuild their own lives.
There was never a single cinematic moment where James Clear transformed into a global expert.
There was no dramatic rock anthem. There were just thousands of 1% days, compounding quietly in the background, long after the initial trauma had faded and long after anyone else was paying attention.
That's a real story.
And that is the ultimate takeaway for you today. You do not need to be twice as good tomorrow. You do not need to overhaul your entire life by Monday. You just need to be 1% better today.
Just 1%.
Stop judging your habits by the results you see in the mirror tomorrow morning. You have to start judging your systems by where they are going to have you standing a year from now.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Something born directly from the mechanics of this system.
Let's hear it.
If every tiny action you take is simply a vote cast for your identity, what happens to your brain when you intentionally start casting votes for an identity completely opposite to how you currently see yourself?
Oh, wow.
Think about that for a second. Could someone who has labeled themselves a lifelong procrastinator literally rewrite their entire psychological self-concept, completely changing who they are, simply by casting tiny, undeniable votes just 2 minutes a day?
It makes you wonder just how quickly your own montage could actually start if you just stopped waiting for the dramatic music to play. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
If you enjoyed this summary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more book summaries, self-improvement content, productivity tips, and personal development lessons.